transient or temporary immunity. It does not stimulate your immune system to make antibodies against it. That's vaccination, and that's what we're also working on.
Fascinating, dude. Wow.
Yep.
Dr. JP, you're dropping some heat right now, dude. Couple things. That chart was fire.
Yep.
That just right there, that was probably the most important 5 minutes I've spent with anybody sprinkling consciousness as you just did on top of that whole thing. We could extrapolate that for a whole nother hour. Thank you also for talking about the immunity thing. That's a whole nother rabbit hole. I don't even think we could even broach right now, but I also appreciate you at least inviting the conversation. Yeah. I want to talk though about your plasma thing, because I've been hearing people throwing this around, and I thought about you immediately, which is why we got on the jam together, right? Because I know this was your bag before this was even, the bag de jour. And it's an interesting thing. It's kind of confusing for a typical dummy like me. It's hard to even kind of understand and grasp how it would work. But what I'm hearing people say is, oh, I had it, I'm immune now, I'm going to start going doing the plasma so I can save the next person. Yep. So can you kind of unwrap that for us in a 101 format?
Absolutely. So I did set it up to give you a little background so that the conversation is a little easier from here. So when we talk about plasma, there's a couple things you may have heard out there. As I mentioned that I'm an aesthetics doctor. I do restorative medicine. I practice in PRP, platelet-rich plasma. So I do injections in the face, into your knees to help cartilage, help with hair regrowth. That is a specific type of plasma, yes. The volumes that we're talking about is we're trying to capture your antibodies. Remember the IgG we just talked about. If you have memory cells and plasma cells that are producing those, if I take your blood from your body and filter it, is I can actually capture those antibodies and then give them to the next person. What does that mean for that next person? That means that for a very temporary period of time, while I give you your antibodies, just like when a mom gives a child antibodies through breast milk,
right?
You are protected because you have my antibodies. My antibodies will attack the virus and make it more difficult for the virus to replicate.
Got it.
Does not mean that I am transmitting immunity to you. I'm transmitting antibodies to you, and that is temporary.
Interesting.
So, exactly. So if you have a 90-year-old neighbor and they accidentally get exposed, that would be the person you say, hey, look, I'm really worried about you. You had an extremely likely exposure. And we've gone back, let's move forward 3 months. We've gone back to less social distancing. That 90-year-old got caught in the crossfire and you think that they may have been exposed. You're worried about them. You send them to the hospital. That may be somebody that gets this plasma that somebody else has provided empirically before any symptoms have occurred to give them a temporary immunity. We do this if you step on a nail. We do this for tetanus, and we do this if you get bitten by a bat or if you get bitten by a rabid animal. We give you immunoglobulin. Okay? Immunoglobulin is that IgG I talked about, and plasmapheresis means that you can take my blood, take the plasma fragment, leave the red blood cells, white blood cells behind, and just give somebody the plasma with the antibodies in it. So it's something where theoretically you could take plasma for platelet-rich plasma and transmit that to somebody because it does have antibodies in it, but the volume that we're usually talking about is typically going to be 200 milliliters of plasma, whereas even in the procedures that I do, which are large volume, that's about 100 mLs. Wow. So it's a lot smaller of a fraction that we'd be using, and it would definitely get very quickly into theory. And what I warn people more than anything else is watching out for snake oil. So you don't want people to start saying, hey, I do PRP. Right. I have somebody that has had this and I'm going to take their plasma and transmit it. Number one is infection. Is if you're not working for an accredited lab that's doing the plasmapheresis, there's no way it's being screened for HIV, West Nile virus, dengue fever, any other host of things. And you just want to make sure that you would be getting that from an accredited location. I can absolutely see if we all want to invest together. I don't want to get into the ethics of it, but I certainly think that people could start to see plasma centers that are starting to sell this, not snake oil, this actual treatment to people if they feel like they're coming down with COVID. If you need to get back to work because you have a very intense job, this will reduce your viremia, which is the number of days that you're holding the COVID virus in your body for, by probably at least half. So people typically are shedding the virus for 20 days, which means after I've had it, I may not have symptoms. You could still find my virus, the COVID, for 20 days. This is cutting it down to 5 to 10 days. They're still working on trying to come up to show outcomes from this. This is not a new idea. They've done this for SARS. They've done it for H5N1. They've done it for H1N1, which was the swine flu that you may have.
Yeah.
And they've had really, really good success with those. They have done studies that have come out of China now from the, I believe it was from February 10th through the 21st of February, that they took 180 patients and showed a very safe transfusion of antibodies into them through this plasma. And the patients had, this is where I'm getting these numbers from, that they were able to drop down from 20 days down to 5 days in course of action. So something that may be available, I certainly hope it's going to be available to the high risk populations, the aged, or those with comorbidities like a history of heart disease. And it's coming down the pipeline. Probably not something you're going to find out of aesthetics clinics. Something that can certainly be discussed, but there would be no promises that anybody should be making to you with that. And certainly before you run for it, make sure you get a couple of opinions about how to get it and what it might be helpful with.
So as I understand it, real quick, just to unpack that from the dummy in the room here, it could potentially basically create like a little invisible force field from you getting it, because that, let's say you're immune, I take your, I got it in there, like it's basically kind of saying, nope, I got it, but it's not actually infusing or sort of hybriding into me. It's not a hack to create my own immunity. It's just sort of defending against me getting it. But then once it wears off, I'm back to kind of being naked again. But then if I do get it, you can do it again and it'll truncate the, the length, I guess, and maybe the severity of it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I am just in love with the fact that if you watch the movie Outbreak again,
I was actually in that movie. I was an extra in that movie.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I was filmed in my hometown.
Oh, I did not know that. Well, we'll have to chat about that offline. That's just an amazing little piece there. At the end of the movie, all of a sudden, Morgan Freeman has this great idea, and he brings in all of this yellow liquid that he's injecting into people. That is plasma. They created plasma, and then they reproduced that plasma, which is a little, that's a little bit for the movies. But they took people's plasma that had Ebola, and then they made this whole thing, and they brought it into the town to inject into people to give them transient or temporary immunity. It does not stimulate your immune system to make antibodies against it. That's vaccination, and that's what we're also working on, but may not be prime time until 2022. Hopefully, and unlikely, this January, we may have some vaccine available. But this is a very slow process. Making a vaccine often takes 10, 15 years. Hey guys, what's the vaccine for HIV? Don't got it yet. It's been around for 30 years and we still have no vaccine for HIV. So to suddenly come up with a vaccine for this coronavirus and to expect to have it by next January, very unlikely, very unlikely.
Well said. Well, I don't want to take any more of your time. You've been so gracious with it, and just my mind is spinning with all the insights that I'm sharing here live with you. The last one I want to hit on, though, is the hydros, right? The hydrochloroquine. Yeah, you do it better than I would. Where are we with that?
So we're actually pretty far along with it. First of all, this drug has been around since the late 1950s, I believe. It's been around forever. We've used it for things like rheumatoid arthritis extremely successfully, lupus extremely successfully. Yep. We know the risk factors of the drug, and they are not zero. They cause a lot of cardiac side effects, dysrhythmias, are things that we can commonly see with this. Hydroxychloroquine is typically 200 milligrams twice a day in the higher end of the dose. We're talking about slightly higher with a loading dose of about 800 milligrams, so 4 tablets, and then taking it twice to 3 times a day. So we are going a little higher than you would expect to see in anyone that you may have bumped into that takes it for lupus or otherwise, who says, hey, I tolerate this medicine really well. I was like, yes, but we are going to be using it a little bit higher, so there are going to be some more of the side effects, like what it does to your heart. Not bad. I would take this in a bet with my buddy. Jesse said, hey, John, I dare you to take this Plaquenil. I'd say, I would take that. I would not let you inject epinephrine into me. I would not let you do a lot of things to me. Plaquenil does not really frighten me, but at the same point is it's not like taking a tablespoon of sugar. It does have more symptoms than that. We are seeing results that are coming out of China initially.
Yeah.
And these studies have actually shown the major side effects people are experiencing are diarrhea in about 1 out of 10 patients. But out of 180 people, 2 people did have some significant cardiac effects, which threatened life, but actually did not cause any death.
Hmm.
Not surprising with the volumes that we're giving is that's about what we would expect. 2 out of 100 people, 1 out of 100 people having a significant side effect from just taking it.
Right.
What we're hoping for and looking for is a decrease in the number of days of either viremia or otherwise. Plaquenil, it works for lupus. It works for rheumatoid arthritis. The reason why is because it reduces the ability of the immune system and the inflammatory system to have these cascade of effects that kill you.
Right.
2 things. If you wait until this cytokine storm occurs, it's too late. So Plaquenil does need to be taken earlier, because I don't know if my symptoms on day 5 are going to be horrible on day 1, or they're going to just be some sniffles. So it is probably something that you start taking when you get a positive test on day 2 or 3 after exposure, and then you would take the Plaquenil. What are we finding? 1 out of 100 people have bad side effects. 1 out of 10 people are having bad diarrhea. There's volumes of this information that's out there. What we have not seen is we haven't seen any consistency in the data. There's a doctor named Dr. Raoul that's coming out of France, who's done some pretty large studies on this. And he has demonstrated that viremia is decreasing from, again, that number of 20 days. That's how long you shed and have the virus for, down to about 10 days. But they're not necessarily showing any major differences in the number of people that are dying or going to the ICU.
Interesting.
So, which is interesting. It says that the COVID virus is doing a little bit more. If you are going to have a intense response to this, the Plaquenil is not going to necessarily save your life. So it's ironic that the person that is benefiting the most from this is not the person with the sniffles, who's going to be at high risk for the diarrhea, but it's the person somewhere in the middle that may have spent a night in the hospital but probably didn't need to get on a ventilator. That person is having a shorter course of events and is not getting on a ventilator. If you were going to be that person, which we don't know on day 0, if you're going to be that person that's going to a ventilator, the Plaquenil doesn't seem to be stopping you from getting to the ventilator. And secondly, it doesn't show that people who are taking Plaquenil are more immune or more resistant to developing the infection. So for a lot of reasons, it's not going to be prime time for us. But when you come into the hospital and you say, hey, look, I've got this shortness of breath and this kind of tightness in my chest, I'm going to still go ahead and say, well, we have this option with Plaquenil. It's not been vetted completely yet. The risk of harm is this, and the risk of benefit is this.
Yeah.
How do you feel about taking it?